5 Fascinating scientific and psychological effects. Number 5. Picture your last bowl of Cheerios. Do the Cheerios hang out alone, minding their own business, or do they tend to stick together? The natural tendency of small objects floating in water to attract one another and to head toward the edges of the container is called the Cheerios effect. The explanation begins with surface tension, the tendency of the surface of a liquid to behave like a type of shield, resisting penetration from floating objects. A Cheerio, which is denser than milk, will remain atop the surface of the milk with the aid of surface tension, but the level of the milk immediately local to the Cheerio will dip slightly, causing nearby Cheerios to behave the same way. Basically, the fall into the slight dip caused by the first Cheerio. An object less dense than the liquid will float naturally, with or without the help of surface tension, and will head towards the edge of the container, seeking the highest point possible. Number 4. Brazil nut effect. The Brazil nut effect, also known as granular convection or the muesli effect, is a phenomenon where, when a group of different-sized particles is shaken vertically, the largest rise to the top. The name comes from the tendency of Brazil nuts end up at the top, resting on smaller nuts, after the can has been transported and shaken. This can seem counterintuitive, as one might expect the largest and heaviest to drop to the bottom and the smallest and lightest to rise to the top. The effect was first studied in the 1930s, and though it's fairly well understood, there are still certain questions that remain unanswered. A couple of separate forces are at work here: percolation, where smaller particles drop down through the relatively large spaces between larger objects, and convection, which drives those larger objects upwards. But at least one other mechanism may be involved: condensation, which is related to temperature. And there is also something known as the reverse Brazil nut problem. The roles of density and pressure are also still being studied. Number 3. False consensus effect. The false consensus effect. We've all been there, and we've all got acquaintances who are more susceptible to it than others. The cognitive bias whereby someone overestimates how much other people agree with them. Your friend who eats only raw, vegan food, and believes that others will necessarily leap at the opportunity to share their diet, is succumbing to the false consensus effect. In general, people have a tendency to internalize what they believe as normal and correct. This is likely due in part to what's known in psychology as the availability heuristic, the process of making decisions based on what immediately comes to mind. Given that we spend time with friends, family, and others who generally share many of our opinions and beliefs, this insular social grouping can contribute to the false consensus effect. It appears that the strength of the effect is increased when we have a high degree of certainty about a position, when what is being discussed or considered is deemed relatively important, and when the behavioral context of the consensus is amplified in some way. Number 2. Hot chocolate effect. Fill a mug with milk or water, then tap the side, or bottom, of the mug with a metal spoon, and listen to the pitch of the sound produced. Then, pour a packet of hot chocolate mix into the mug, and tap again. The pitch will have dropped significantly. Then, as the powder dissolves, the pitch of the sound begins to rise again. This is known as the hot chocolate effect, and was first studied by physicist Frank Crawford in 1982. Also known as the elasonic effect, the phenomenon is caused by the change of the speed of sound in the mug as the various new elements are introduced and as these new elements change. Specifically, the density of the bubbles created when the powder hits the liquid changes, causing a change in the sound that passes through them. Number 1. Wobegon effect. The Wobegon effect, known more formally as illusory superiority, is another cognitive bias. So nicknamed because the children in Garrison Keillor's fictional town of Wobegon are above average, illusory superiority is a phenomenon whereby people consider themselves to be better than others, in other words, above average with regard to specific abilities, skills, performance, and intellect. This effect is seen quite commonly in drivers, who reliably consider themselves to be superior to other drivers on the road.